Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining me. We're out at the property around my cabin today. I thought I'd take you on a tour. We'll do something a little different. We'll go for a hike, maybe have lunch in between. Now, the opening clip, that was a wolf and some wolf tracks, and I found uh, that day, pulled the camera chip, and there he is. So I don't often see wolves in our area, but once in a while they do show up. We have a lot of coyotes and bobcats, but not usually, and the occasional bear too, of course, but not usually the apex predator of the Northwoods, but we do have them. On the property, we kind of have little pet names for the areas or the crossing, the river crossing, the creek crossings. And I don't know, we kind of do that to help navigate, or like when we're communicating for hunting season and that. We have different places where we fish also. The one that we're coming up to here we call the Long Pond, and it's a fairly good stretch of water between two large riffles. That's always a scary feeling on the river when you hear the ice crack and the ice shifts. Now, the water here is not very deep, actually. It's probably only waist deep, but it's cold. And on this day, it was about 20 degrees temperature, so below freezing. Not exactly the time you want to get wet. But the ice turned out to be plenty thick, and there was no problem for me crossing here. I always like to check the river ice and check the tracks, the animal tracks. And today, mostly, really nothing big to see. There were a few bobcat tracks it looked like, and then a lot of turkey tracks. So lately, I guess a few deer tracks too. Now that I think about it, but not exactly a ton of animals running around on the ice. That snow is about 3 days old at this point, so usually there's more tracks than that. The other thing is that river is basically, in the winter, a highway for four wheelers and ATVs. And so far, the riffles have been open, so you don't see too many vehicles going up and down it. Thank goodness. It kind of does ruin my peacefulness when I hear a bunch of four wheelers coming and going. After walking up out of river bottom, we come up on Buck Ridge. And we call it Buck Ridge, I guess, because we've always hunted it. And it's kind of an old oak woods, an old oak forest, and the deer spend a lot of time in there. There's been quite a bit of damage lately from the wind. We had a good windstorm the last couple summers. And I think 2 summers ago was the big storm. But here's a deer bed or two in the snow that I found. But they're always in there. And we've called it Buck Ridge mostly because we've harvested quite a few deer out of it. The forest pretty much consists of red oaks, white oaks, quite a bit of white pine mixed in. There's some maple, mostly soft maple. My father told me the hard maple, much of it was cut out back in the 30s because that's really all they could sell back then for hardwoods. So we have some sugar maple mixed in, but most of it's like a soft maple. You get around the river and the creek, and then you see your hemlocks. There'll be stands of eastern hemlock, and but that's pretty much the way it is. We have some birch and popple mixed in depending on where it's at, and so it's a pretty good mixed forest. I forgot to mention a couple places along the creek we got yellow birch too, and it's related, of course, to white birch. And the bark works just as well, maybe even a little better. It always seems to have a bunch of loose ends shedding off of the bark, and I think I've peeled this one before for fire starter. So really, you can't beat it. But we do have some yellow birch mixed in, and a few cottonwoods along the creek. This one we call the Beaver Dam Crossing. It crosses the creek. It's right about the center of the property. And when I was a kid, the beavers built a dam here every year, and it got washed out every year by the high water in the spring. But they tried every year. They would flood the forest upstream, of course, and cut off the popple. Most of the harvested all the popple out. And then once the popple were all gone, they pretty much left, and I haven't seen a beaver in that creek since. On this particular day, the woods was extremely quiet, and it isn't often that way, but I guess being it's after Christmas and it's cold, or at least fairly cold in the mornings, nothing was out. I didn't even hear a crow, which usually you hear constantly, or a raven making noise, but it's the way it is sometimes. It's definitely time to stop and make a fire and have a like a brunch. I got going fairly early. I had some chores to do and didn't start my hike right away. And according to my Fitbit, the round trip was about 2.25 miles. So not exactly, a huge distance, but far enough to go on a Saturday morning. My brother calls this place the Grotto. It's just basically a bunch of hemlocks going along the creek with like a little valley up against the water, like a mud flat. And these are all hemlocks, and hemlocks have a tendency of dying out on the bottom. And it's funny how dry they'll be. They'll still be attached to the green tree, and the wood will be dry. So it's kind of a nice wood for starting a fire. It's not real good for cooking on. It is kind of sooty, but it does start a fire pretty quick. Today, I kind of cheated. I didn't use the flint and steel. I used the Zippo lighter, but that's okay too. As you can see, that yellow birch bark burns pretty well. It doesn't take long, makes a lot of heat, and ignites your smaller sticks. So that's kind of a good resource out in the woods. little tea and Christmas Day leftovers make for a good brunch over the campfire out in the woods. My brother-in-law did some smoked pork for us and gave me a bunch, and that, some vegetables, and a couple of eggs. That makes for a pretty good meal. After I ate brunch, I packed everything up, put the fire out, and headed back towards the cabin. It was only about a quarter mile away, so it was an easy hike, but it still is a good feeling to see the cabin on top of the ridge. And as you cross the ice, you know it's nice and warm inside. So if you've made it this far, I want to thank you for joining me out in the woods, this little property tour. If you would please subscribe, share, and smash that thumbs up button. It does help my channel out. And if you like content like this, leave me a comment. This time of year, I don't do much cabin building. It's kind of too cold, but it is a nice time to get stuff in to the site. But anyway, thank you for joining me, and we'll see you in the next one.